Welcome students. In the previous class we have learned about what is resource, what is neutral stuff and what are the characteristics of resources. Today we will going to discuss about the broad classification of resources. There are different bases by which we can classify the resources. First basis you can say on the basis of resource creating factor. On the basis of resource creating factors. Particularly on the basis of resource creating factor, we broadly subdivided the resource into three types. One is called natural resources, another one is called as human resources, another one is called as the cultural resources. So what are the natural resources? It is very easy to remember. The elements or the matters or the substance come from the nature directly is called as the natural resources. Or you can say the natural resources are those that are given from the nature. So such type of substance is comes from the nature. Example like water, natural vegetation, so such type of things, such type of substance come from the nature. That's why it have been considered as a natural resources. Again, we broadly divided the natural resources into three types. One is called as organic resources, another one is called as inorganic resources, and the last one is biotic abiotic resources. So these are the three divisions of the natural resources. What are organic resources? Organic resources means the resource are obtained from the organism. Such type of resources is called as the organic resources. Example like flora, and you can say the fauna. So these are basically the organic resources. Now what are the inorganic resources? The inorganic resources are those resources that are abiotic in nature but they are inanimate. Like as example the land, you can say the capital. So these are basically the inorganic resources. On the other hand, the biotic and the abiotic resources, actually those resources that is basically the combination of both organic as well as the inorganic in matter. So this type of resources is called as the biotic and abiotic resources. Example like soil, coal. So such type of substance is basically called as biotic and abiotic resources. So from the beginning, what are the natural resources? Natural resources are those resources comes from nature directly. Example like water, natural vegetation. Natural resources further subdivided into three types. One is called organic, another one is called as inorganic, and the biotic and abiotic resources. Organic resources like as example the flora comes from the organism. Inorganic resources that is basically inorganic in nature, basic example like land. And biotic and abiotic resources like soil, coal, peat. So these are basically the natural resources. Second type of resources is human resources. Now what are human resources? Human resources are those that have been acquired from the qualities of human being. or you can say human resources are basically the different type of activities which help to produce the resources. Such type of things is called as the human resources. Example like the population, labor. So these are basically called as the human resources. Now one thing you remember, man plays a dual role, particularly in resource creating factor. On one hand, man creates the resource, on the other hand, man destroyed the resource. Third important is cultural resources. Now, what is culture? You can say culture is the mosaic of habits. So, cultural resources that evolve from the progress of civilization with the interactions of the nature as well as the human knowledge. So, these are basically influence for the resource creating factor. Example like technology, example like education. Second basis by which we can classify the resource is the basis of nature of ownership. So on the basis of nature of ownership, particularly on the basis of nature of ownership, we classified the resource broadly 3 or 4 type. One is called personal resource. You can say as individual resource also. Another type of resource is called as the social resource. Another type of resource you can say as the national resource. And the fourth type of resource is called as international resources. Now what are the personal resources? You think the personal resources are those resources owned by a single or individual or a group of individual. That time it is called as the personal resources. Like as example, when you came to school by your own bicycle, so that is an example of personal resource, or you can say your house is an example of the personal resource. Now what are the social resources? Social resources are those resources that have been useful for the society perspective, or they can be helpful or used for the social welfare. So such kind of resource is considered as the social resources. Example like school, hospital. So this type of example you can say as the social resources, or maybe you can say the playground. So they are need for the society. So such type of example is called as the social resources. Another type of resource is national resources. National resources, you think the resource are belong to group of people of nation. So such type of resource is called as the national resources. They are not considered as a individual one. They are basically for the country perspective, for the development of the nation. Such type of resource are used. So these resources considered as the national resources. Example like national law. Example like railways. So these resources considered as the national resources. International resources, like as example the resource basically meet the demand for the world. So these resources is generally considered as the international resources. Example like open sea, World Bank. Example like South Pole, that means the Antarctica. So these are basically considered as the international resources. Now from the beginning, you see, on the basis of nature of ownership, we broadly divided the resource four type. One is called personal or individual, one is called as the social resources, another one is called as the national, and the last one is called as the international. Individual resources means you have own ownership. That type of resource is called as the international resources. Example, your house. Second one, the social resources. The resources are used by the society. That resources is called as the social resources. Example like hospital, playground. National resources, that means the resource is useful for the national peoples or the national sectors. So these are considered as the national resources. Like as example, the railways. International resources means the resources which are enjoyed for the whole nation or whole world. That type of resource is called as the international resources. Now these are basically on the basis of nature of ownership. Now I going to discuss about on the basis of obtain. On the basis of obtain. On the basis of obtain, we classified the resource into four types. One type of resource you can say as the ubiquitous. Another type of resource you can say as the commonalities. Another type of resource you can say as rarities. And another type of resource you can say as the uniquitous. Now see, on the basis of obtain, we divided the resource four type. One is called as the ubiquitous, one is called as commonalities, one is called rarities, another one is called as the uniquitous. It is very easy to remember the term ubiquitous, that means general available resource. Commonalities, overall available resource. Rarities, rarely available resource. And uniquitous, that means single available resources. Now see the term. One is called ubiquitous, general available resources, commonalities, overall available resources, rarities, rarely available resources, uniquitous, single available resources. Now what is ubiquitous resources? Actually those resources you can obtain from anywhere, or you can say the found generally and easily available in our earth. So such kind of example is called as the ubiquitous resources. Example like soil, example like air. So these resources you can find out everywhere in a general concept. So such type of resource is called as the ubiquitous resources. Now next type of resource is called as the commonalities resources. You can say the resource are not found everywhere on the earth, but commonly found in many parts of the earth surface. So such type of resource is called as the overall available resources. Like as example fish. Next one, rarely available resources, that means the resource are found from few fixed places. and they are basically in rare communities. Actually, such type of resource are not common, they are found rarely and some selected part of the world. So such type of resource is called as the rare resources. Example like you can say the tin, example like gold. So this type of example you can say the rarities resources. Another type of resource you can say the ubiquitous resources, that means single available resources. The resource is collected from only one place of the earth, that's why it have been called as the ubiquitous or single available resources. Example like cryolite that have been found in southwestern part of Greenland. Cryolite. So cryolite, it have been only found in Greenland, particularly in Greenland southwestern part. Southwestern part. So these are basically the ubiquitous type of resource. Now from the beginning, they are the on the basis of obtain we broadly divide the resource generally four type. One is called as the ubiquitous resource, another one is called as the commonalities, another one is rarities, and the ubiquitous.